Give me 23 minutes and I will erase your weakness. Not by pouring motivation into your ears, not by wrapping you in the warm blanket of shallow inspiration, but by stripping away the stories you have mistaken for truth. What you call weakness is not your nature. It is not your soul, your destiny, or your permanent identity. It is a trick of the mind, a role you have been cast into and repeated so many times that you began to confuse the costume for your own skin. Alan Watts once said that most of what we suffer is not reality, but our stubborn insistence on holding to illusions. And weakness is one of the most persistent illusions of all. You believe you are fragile because you were trained to repeat the script of fragility. You have carried it for so long that you defend it as if it were precious, when in truth it has only chained you. So let us begin. For less than half an hour, I ask you to let go of the noise of the world and sit with the possibility that you are not broken, that nothing essential in you is lacking. Your weakness is not real. It is a shadow, a misinterpretation, a cloud covering the mountain that was always beneath it. What will happen in these minutes is not that you will become stronger, but that you will remember what strength has always felt like when you stop pretending to be less than you are. Watts believed life itself is a play, and the tragedy is that we take our roles too seriously. You have been playing the character of the weak one, and now it is time to put the mask down. This is not motivation. This is revelation. And if you allow it, what you call weakness will dissolve like mist at sunrise, leaving only what was always there. You, unshaken, awake, and free. You have been told that weakness is who you are, that it is a permanent label stitched into your being. But that is a lie dressed as truth, a story repeated so often you forgot it was just a story. Weakness is not something you are, it is something you perform. Alan Watts would remind you that the self you cling to is a pattern, not a solid thing. It is a bundle of memories, habits, and voices from others that you've adopted and rehearsed until the performance became convincing, even to you. What you call "I am weak" is not a fact, it is a line in the play you inherited. You speak it, you act it, and then you forget that you are on stage. Think for a moment. When you say you are weak, what do you really mean? Do you mean that your body is fragile, that your mind is dull, that your will is absent? Or do you mean that you have been trained to doubt yourself, to look at every impulse with suspicion, to obey every authority except the authority of your own being? Weakness is not found in your bones or your blood. It is manufactured in your thinking, polished by your culture, reinforced by the need to fit in, and so you confuse the echo for your own voice. Watts would say that the tragedy of human beings is that we identify with masks. We wear them for so long, we mistake them for skin. You were handed the mask of weakness through your upbringing, through your society, through the subtle rewards of being soft, compliant, agreeable, and you wore it. You learned that people smile when you hide your power, that they approve when you hold back, that they are comfortable when you are small, and then you called this weakness your nature. But it never was. What is real in you has never been weak. What is real does not need to pretend, does not need to apologize, does not need to shrink. Weakness is a narrative. You are not the narrative. You are the awareness watching it, the stage on which it plays. The illusion only lasts as long as you keep repeating your lines. The moment you stop, the mask slips, and the truth, the vast, unshakable strength beneath, begins to breathe again. Alan Watts never spoke to the crowd that wanted easy comfort, because comfort is a narcotic, not a cure. His words were not designed to soothe you into sleep, but to shake you awake. He knew that most people approach philosophy like children, asking for a bedtime story, hoping to be reassured that everything will be fine, that they are safe, that the universe will take care of them if only they stay obedient. But Watts was too honest to play that role. He stripped away the lullabies and left you staring at the rawness of existence. He spoke to those who were tired of hiding behind slogans, who no longer believed in shallow affirmations, who were ready to look into the mirror of life without blinking. If you are still here listening, it is because a part of you already knows that weakness cannot be erased by cliches. No motivational phrase will save you, no list of life hacks will restore your dignity. Watts would say the truth is far more unsettling. You were never weak to begin with. What you thought was weakness was the fog of your own illusions, and to see through it requires courage. And not everyone has that courage. Many will click away, retreat back into distraction, tell themselves they already understand. That is fine. This message was never for them. It is for you, the one who has stayed. Watts often pointed out that life is not a problem to be solved, but an experience to be lived fully, even when it feels dangerous. To listen to him is to risk losing the excuses you have clung to, the fragile shell of identity that says, I cannot, I am small, I am broken. If you are still listening, it means you are ready to let that shell crack. You are ready to face reality, not as a victim begging for reassurance, but as a being willing to confront life in its fullness. Weakness dissolves when you stop asking to be protected and start daring to see. And by staying here, you've already proven that you are not like the others. What does it really mean to be weak? Most people would answer too quickly. They would say weakness is crying too much, or not being disciplined, or feeling emotions too deeply. They would point to physical fragility, to trembling hands, to hesitation in the face of challenge. But Alan Watts would tell you that none of these things are weakness. To feel is not to be weak. To tremble is not to be weak. To shed tears is not to be weak. Weakness does not come from expression, but from resistance, from the attempt to deny what is flowing through you. Frailty is not in the current of emotion, but in the clenching grip that tries to dam it, that insists life must be otherwise than it is. Weakness is not crying. Weakness is pretending you must never cry. Weakness is not fear. Weakness is running from fear and dressing it as humility or politeness. Weakness is not pain. Weakness is the refusal to face it, the endless escape into distraction, the building of walls that eventually become your cage. Watts taught that reality is a dance, a flow, a river that moves whether you participate or not. To cling to the banks, to demand certainty, to freeze yourself against the movement. That is weakness. Strength is letting the water move through you without losing your ground. So when you say you are weak, look closely. Do you mean you feel too much, or do you mean you are terrified of feeling at all? Do you mean you are small, or do you mean you are exhausted from holding up the mask of strength that pleases everyone else? Real weakness is the refusal to surrender to what is already true. It is the addiction to control, the stubborn resistance to impermanence, the desperate need to appear solid in a world that is liquid. Watts would say that weakness is the ego's insistence that it can outwit the flow of life, when all along the flow is what sustains you. And strength, the kind that cannot be shaken, comes not from resistance, but from release. To fall into life completely, without excuses, without masks, is to discover that you were never weak. You were only afraid to let go. From the moment you were born, you were trained to conform. You were taught to raise your hand for permission, to wait for approval, to measure your worth by the nods and frowns of authority. Schools did not exist to make you free, but to make you predictable, to fit you into a system that runs more smoothly when no one questions it. Alan Watts would say that society is a grand performance in which almost everyone forgets they are acting. You memorize your lines, you play the good student, the obedient worker, the polite citizen, and in exchange, you are given acceptance. But that acceptance has a price, the slow erasure of your individuality. The media whispers constantly that you are not enough, not safe, not adequate, unless you buy, consume, and conform. Every headline tells you where to direct your fear. Every commercial tells you who to become. This is not education. It is conditioning. It is hypnosis disguised as awareness. And the tragedy is that even love, the purest bond, often reinforces the same roles. Families praise you when you are quiet, when you are agreeable, when you sacrifice your truth for harmony. They scold you when you assert yourself, when you resist the script, when you choose your own direction. They don't always mean harm, but they too were taught the same performance and they hand it down like an inheritance. Watts would point out that the system thrives not by force, but by consent. It convinces you that obedience is kindness, that submission is maturity, that shrinking yourself is noble. You become soft because the world rewards softness. You become hesitant because others feel safer when you hesitate. You become invisible because it makes the tribe comfortable. And all the while you mistake this for goodness. But what they call goodness is often just weakness in disguise. The system does not care if you find truth. It cares that you fit. And so long as you fit, you are forgettable. To wake up is to see the bars of the cage that everyone else calls home, and to realize that the enemy is not out there, but inside the very conditioning that taught you to bow. All your life you have been wearing a mask, and the longer you keep it on, the more you confuse it for your face. You smile when you are supposed to smile. You nod when silence feels dangerous. You swallow words that might disturb the fragile peace around you. Little by little, the performance becomes so polished that even you believe it. Alan Watts would remind you that the ego is not who you are. It is the character you play. It is a bundle of reactions, habits, and borrowed opinions stitched together into something that looks like a person. But beneath it lies the essence, the awareness that was there before you learned your first word, the vitality that existed before anyone told you who you should be. The mask exists to make others comfortable. It is tailored to the expectations of family, teachers, colleagues, lovers. It is built out of the fear of rejection and the hunger for belonging. And so you keep adjusting it, smoothing its edges, repainting it with every new audience. The tragedy is not that you wear the mask. It is that you forget there is a living presence beneath it. You start to believe you are nothing more than the polite, agreeable, compliant figure society applauds. And in that forgetting, you lose contact with your strength. Watts would say that to live only as the mask is to live half alive. You become cautious instead of spontaneous, scripted instead of real, tame instead of vital. You no longer ask, what do I truly want, but what am I allowed to want? You no longer act, you react. You no longer speak, you filter. And every time you betray the essence for the safety of the performance, you shrink a little further from yourself. But the mask was never the enemy. It was only a tool. The danger lies in mistaking the tool for the self. When you remember that the mask is just a role, you can drop it at will. You can laugh without worrying who is watching, speak without rehearsing, walk into a room without asking silently for permission to exist. Strength does not come from defending the mask, but from stepping beyond it. The essence has no need for applause. It simply is, raw, unshakable, undeniable. And the moment you touch it, you realize that what you called weakness was only the exhaustion of carrying a mask that never belonged to you. You already know the feeling, though you may not have named it. It creeps into your mornings when you wake up heavy, not because your body is weak, but because your spirit is tired of pretending. It follows you through the day as a low hum of anxiety, a quiet tension in the chest, a restlessness you cannot quite explain. You tell yourself it's stress or lack of sleep or just the way life is, But Alan Watts would say it is the cost of living against your own current. It is the exhaustion of resisting the flow of who you really are. Think of the fatigue that lingers no matter how much you rest. That isn't weakness in your muscles. It's the drain of suppressing your instincts. Think of the apathy that makes even the things you once loved feel flat. That isn't proof you are broken. It's the numbness that comes from denying your essence. And the emptiness, that hollow space you try to fill with noise, with entertainment, with constant scrolling. That is not a flaw, but a signal. It is life knocking at the door, reminding you that you are starving for something real, something unmasked, something unpolished. Watts would insist that what you call weakness is simply the echo of this self-betrayal. When you trade your authentic impulses for safety, you create tension inside, like a river dammed up and desperate to move. That tension becomes anxiety. When you silence yourself to keep others comfortable, your own energy turns inward, suffocating you until it feels like emptiness. When you avoid discomfort at all costs, you lose the sharpness of aliveness, and what remains is apathy. Look at your life with honesty. How many moments are lived for appearance rather than truth? How often do you speak what is expected instead of what is real? The prison is not somewhere in the future. You are already sitting in it. The bars are made of hesitation, of masks, of the constant performance of being agreeable. And the heaviness you carry every day is your body, your mind, your very soul trying to remind you. You are not weak. You are suffocating under the weight of a role that was never yours. The symptoms are not proof of your failure. They are proof that the real you is still alive, demanding to be free. Weakness rarely announces itself in dramatic ways. It shows up quietly, in the small routines you hardly notice. You open your eyes in the morning, and before you even take a breath of awareness, your hand reaches for the phone. In that single gesture, you surrender your day to the world outside yourself. You scroll, you compare, you absorb fragments of other people's lives before you have even touched your own. Alan Watts would say, "This is not harmless. It is the mechanical habit of escaping the present moment, the constant running away from yourself into the noise of others." Each morning you repeat this ritual of self-abandonment, and each morning it reinforces the illusion that you are weak. It is the same with your words. Notice how often you soften them, water them down, hesitate to speak truth. You say maybe when you mean no. You say sorry when you are not sorry. You laugh at jokes that do not amuse you, nod at opinions you do not believe. This is not kindness. It is fear disguised as politeness. It is the habit of trading authenticity for approval. Watts would call it a game you have forgotten you are playing, a script performed so automatically that you believe it is who you are. But the more you play, the further you drift from the vitality of your essence. Even your body carries these patterns. The way you slump your shoulders, keep your eyes low, breathe shallowly, all of it tells a story. Not the story of who you are, but of who you've been trained to be, compliant, invisible, safe. These postures are not accidental. They are rehearsed signals of submission, and the more you repeat them, the more they shape how you feel. Weakness hides in these daily rituals because they keep you locked in a loop of forgetting. But Watts would remind you that you are never trapped, only distracted. Every habit is a choice you stop noticing, and every choice can be reclaimed. Before you reach for the phone, pause. Before you speak, breathe. Before you shrink, remember that your spine was meant to rise. Strength does not come from force but from presence. The decision, in each small moment, to return to yourself instead of fleeing into habit. The revolution is not grand. It begins in the tiniest acts of remembering. You have been taught to believe that strength means being untouched by emotion, as if the absence of feeling were a sign of mastery. But Alan Watts would laugh at such a misunderstanding. To feel nothing is not strength. It is numbness, a kind of paralysis that cuts you off from the pulse of life itself. The wise are not those who suppress their emotions, but those who see them clearly, who recognize them as passing waves on the vast ocean of awareness. The wave rises, it swells, it crashes, and then it dissolves back into the sea. So it is with anger, fear, joy, sadness. None of them are permanent. None of them define you. Weakness is not in the feeling. It is in clinging to the wave as if it were the whole ocean. Think of how often you say, "I am angry" or "I am anxious," as though those states are your identity. Watts would remind you that it would be more honest to say, "Anger is passing through me," or "Anxiety is here for a moment." Because when you fuse yourself with the emotion, you become its prisoner. You react impulsively, defend yourself unnecessarily, lash out or collapse inward. You mistake the temporary for the eternal. That is weakness, not emotion itself but identification with it. True strength is the pause. It is the ability to witness the emotion without drowning in it, to feel it fully and yet choose your response. Imagine someone insults you. Weakness explodes or retreats. Strength breathes, observes, waits. The insult passes like thunder, and only then do you move calmly, precisely, without apology. This is not cold detachment, it is clarity. It is the recognition that you are larger than any feeling. Watts believed that emotions are essential, part of the grand play of existence. But they are roles, not the actor. You are the stage upon which joy and grief perform, not the character who lives or dies with each scene. To master emotion is not to cut yourself off from it, but to stop bowing to it as your master. When you see emotions for what they are, waves rising and falling in the sea of your being, you discover a freedom that is unshakable. Strength is not the absence of storms, but the knowing that no storm can touch the depth of the ocean itself. And that ocean is you. You have been telling your story as if it were carved in stone. The pain you endured, the betrayals, the moments when life cut too deeply. You repeat these stories as though they are your definition, the final word on who you are. But Alan Watts would look at you and shake his head. You are not the content of your experiences, he would say. You are the field in which they arise and dissolve. The events of your life are weather, and you are the sky. The storms can be violent, the rain unrelenting, but the sky is never broken by what passes through it. To cling to trauma as your identity is to confuse a passing cloud for the endless horizon. Weakness is not what happened to you, but the way you keep rehearsing it. Every time you tell your story as tragedy, you reinforce the bars of your cage. You wear your scars like chains instead of armor. You hope others will treat you gently if they know how much you have suffered, but that gentleness comes at the cost of your freedom. For then you are not seen as alive, as powerful, as dangerous. You are seen as damaged, and you begin to see yourself the same way. This is not compassion, it is subtle imprisonment. Watts would remind you that pain is real, but identification with pain is illusion. The wound is part of the play, not the whole stage. When you make it your personality, you shrink yourself into a role too small for the vastness of your being. Life is not asking you to deny your suffering, but to stop worshipping it, to stop polishing it like a sacred relic, to stop telling yourself and others that this is all you are. Strength comes when you rewrite the story, not with denial but with transformation. You do not say, "I am broken, but I have walked through fire." You do not say, "I am a victim, but I am a witness who endured and still remains." And eventually even those words fall away because you realize you do not need them. You no longer seek validation from your wounds. You are not the storm. You are the sky. And when you see that clearly, the role of the victim dissolves and in its place emerges something far greater, the presence that cannot be touched by what passes through it. Most people waste their lives waiting for purpose to reveal itself, as if one day the universe will send a letter with their name on it, spelling out the reason for their existence. Alan Watts, echoing Nietzsche, would tell you that this waiting is a trap. Life does not hand out purposes like pre-written scripts. Life is raw, undefined, open. Its meaning is not delivered to you, it is chosen by you. Purpose is not found, it is carved. It is not hiding in the stars or in the approval of others. It is born in the moment you decide who you will be and what you will stand for. Think of how often you delay. You tell yourself you will act once you know your destiny, once you are certain of your why. But that certainty never comes because you are looking in the wrong place. Purpose is not external, not something that waits like a treasure buried under the sand. It is creative. It is an act of declaration. You choose it in the same way an artist chooses a canvas or a poet chooses words. Watts would say that the game of life is not about discovering the rules, but about realizing you are free to invent your role. So what will you choose? To live for comfort, for appearances, for survival alone, or to live for something sharper, something that makes your presence undeniable? Your why does not have to be grand, but it must be yours. It could be truth, it could be freedom, it could be creation, it could be love. But it cannot be borrowed from society or handed down by your family, because those whys are weak. They belong to the mask, not the essence. Write it down, decide it, make it non-negotiable. Because once you declare a why, the noise of life begins to fall away. Distractions lose their grip, temptations weaken, doubts fade into background static. When you know your direction, you no longer scatter your energy. You walk with clarity. You live with force. Watts would insist, do not wait for purpose like a beggar. Choose it like a creator, and once chosen, let it shape every breath you take. For the greatest weakness is drifting without a reason, and the greatest strength is to wake each day already knowing what you serve. All your life you have been trained to belong. From the classroom to the dinner table, from the workplace to your closest relationships, the silent demand has been the same. Do not stand too far apart. Belonging is presented as safety, as warmth, as the proof that you are valued. But Alan Watts would remind you that what most people call belonging is often just the fear of standing alone. It is not true connection, but silent submission. You learn to trade your authenticity for acceptance, to soften your edges so no one feels threatened, to silence your instincts so the tribe does not cast you out. And over time, you confuse this compromise with love. The truth is more uncomfortable. Much of what passes for belonging is nothing more than the avoidance of solitude. And solitude terrifies you, because it reveals what you really are without the mask, without the roles, without the constant feedback of others to tell you who you should be. Watts would say that the fear of being alone is the fear of meeting yourself. When the noise fades, when the stage is empty, when no one is there to clap or to scold, the essence that has always been buried beneath the performance stands before you. Most flee from that moment, because it is raw, unfiltered, undeniable. But solitude is not a threat, it is liberation. In solitude, you discover that you were never as fragile as you feared. You begin to see that the hunger for approval was not about love, but about survival. A childhood instinct that hardened into a lifelong habit. To step beyond it is to breathe fully for the first time. In the stillness of being alone, your strength begins to expand, not shrink. You find that you can stand without the tribe, that your worth is not dependent on applause. Watts would insist that real belonging cannot be bought by self-betrayal. It emerges only when you are willing to stand apart, when you no longer beg for a seat at someone else's table but build your own. And if no one joins you, you remain whole. Solitude becomes a vast space rather than a cage, an opening into the infinite, rather than proof of isolation. Weakness is the addiction to belonging at any cost. Strength is the courage to face yourself in the silence and discover that you are already complete. Imagine for a moment stripping yourself bare, not of clothes but of roles. One by one you set them aside. The obedient child, the agreeable friend, the compliant worker, the polite stranger. You take off the layers of apology, of hesitation, of self-doubt, until what remains is not the persona the world molded, but the raw presence that has always been beneath. Alan Watts would say that liberation does not come from adding something new, but from dropping what was never yours. The ego is a costume, the persona a mask, the performance a script. To be free is to step off the stage and remember that you are not the character, but the actor, and deeper still, the space in which the entire play unfolds. This ritual of liberation is not dramatic. It is subtle, daily, precise. It begins with the words you use. Each time you say, "I don't know," when you do, you fracture your integrity. Each time you apologize for existing, you cut into your own spine. To stop is an act of rebellion. Speak with clarity. Say what you mean, without dilution, without the nervous laughter that betrays your fear. When you allow silence to follow your words, when you no longer rush to fill the space, that silence becomes power. People lean in, unsettled, because they can feel the shift. You are no longer leaking energy, you are holding it. Your body too becomes part of the ritual. Check your posture, lift your spine, breathe deeper. Walk into rooms without asking permission to belong. These are not trivial adjustments. They are the physical declaration that you are finished with shrinking. Presence is not loud, but it is undeniable, and it begins in the way you inhabit your own skin. Watts would emphasize that liberation is not achieved in one grand moment, but in the repetition of small choices. Every time you refuse the old script, every time you remain present instead of fleeing into distraction, every time you choose truth over performance, you are breaking the contract of weakness. This is the ritual, not candles, not chants, but the steady peeling away of what is false. Each day a little more mask dissolves, and a little more essence shines through. Freedom is not waiting. It is practiced here and now, in the smallest acts of remembering who you truly are. Strength was never absent from you. It was only concealed, hidden under layers of stories you mistook for truth. Alan Watts would tell you that awakening is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who you already are. The force you keep searching for in books, in teachers, in external achievements has been quietly alive inside you since the beginning. You did not lose it. You only buried it under fear, under obedience, under the endless rehearsal of a character that was never your essence. When you begin to see this clearly, something irreversible happens. Once the illusion cracks, it cannot be repaired. Once you glimpse that what you called weakness was never real, only a mask, you cannot put the mask back on without feeling its weight. Watts often compared such moments to the ringing of a bell. Once struck, it resonates forever. You cannot unhear the sound of your own awakening. The pretending becomes unbearable. The old excuses dissolve, and the longing to return to your authentic strength becomes unstoppable. This is why the shift feels so absolute. It is not a gradual improvement, not a slow accumulation of strength, but a sudden recognition. You were strong all along. The river does not become the ocean by adding more water. It becomes the ocean the moment it realizes it was never separate. In the same way, you do not create power. You uncover it. And from here, there is no going back. The fragile identity you once clung to begins to look absurd, like a costume worn long after the play has ended. You see clearly that your essence is vast, unshakable, untouchable. The world may try to pull you back into its games of conformity and fear, but once you have tasted this clarity, compliance feels like poison. Watts would say this is the point of no return, the moment when you stop asking life for permission and start living as the presence you always were. The bell has rung, the illusion has shattered, and now you cannot pretend not to know. You stand now at the edge of a decision that no one else can make for you. All that has been said, all that has been revealed comes down to this. Will you continue to live inside the illusion of weakness, rehearsing the same tired lines of fragility and doubt? Or will you step fully into the strength that has been waiting beneath your skin all along? Alan Watts would remind you that existence itself does not demand you stay small. That was the invention of culture, of fear, of habit. Life is not holding you down. You are. And so the choice is painfully simple. Continue to perform the role of the victim, the hesitant, the agreeable, the apologetic, or tear off the mask and let the raw essence speak for itself. Do not misunderstand. Choosing strength does not mean posturing, shouting, or forcing. It means presence. A presence so steady that no opinion can shake it, no circumstance can break it, no rejection can reduce it. A presence that is serene but unyielding. You already know the cost of staying the same. The heaviness, the frustration, the quiet resentment that never leaves. You also know even now the taste of what lies on the other side. Clarity, dignity, the still power of someone who no longer bargains for permission. This is not motivation. This is ultimatum. You cannot unknow what you have heard. You cannot unsee what has been uncovered. So here is the line in the sand. Stay asleep and call it safety, or wake up and claim what was always yours. Strength is not something you wait for. It is something you embody. Not tomorrow, not when it feels convenient, but now. Alan Watts would say that life is not a rehearsal. The play is happening in this very breath. And the actor you choose to be from this moment forward will shape everything. This is your standard now. Guard it as if your life depends on it, because it does.